I'm Jim Kunkel, and welcome to MCI Insights. Joining me today is Juan Caballero, the Master Coder Inspector. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about concrete-related coatings and linings. Juan, welcome.
Hello, Jim. I'm very glad to be here with you again on our second episode of Master Coating Inspector Insights.
Yeah, last week we got a lot of great feedback regarding talking about the inspector duties, and what we're going to do in the second episode is to focus into a series related to concrete. And the first thing that we really want to kind of cover in relationship is the coatings and linings, but obviously the most important thing before any type of prep is done or coating or lining are applied to concrete is to do a concrete condition assessment. So what I'd like to ask you questions on, and especially in your experience working as a concrete coating inspector, is the conditions that you typically encounter. And what I'm looking at is more for floor systems, and then also in the, let's say, the water, wastewater, because of the corrosive nature in water, wastewater. But so you as an inspector, typically, what are some of the conditions or the assessment steps that you're doing related to concrete, either be it a floor system or, vertical concrete, let's say in a containment tank or wastewater facility?
Yes, Tim, many thanks. First of all, I would like to mention, based on my experience, that not in every project we have the opportunity to do an appropriate assessment. But as you mentioned, the most important part when you are working with concrete and you will coat concrete is to do a very good assessment at the beginning. You need to know what are the concrete defects before you can prepare it and coat it. And, in general terms, most of the defects that I have found while doing a concrete coating project is mainly about, the cracks, mainly cracks in the concrete, some other defects as honeycombs, and mainly is the problem with concrete I have found more is when you have these bar rods that are corroded because the concrete have not been previously adequately well prepared and coated with a good painting system. So there are many other defects, but I would like to mention those three because are kind of most common when you assess most of the concrete structures that are out there.
So, some of the other things to consider, you're testing the pH level of the concrete?
Yeah, pH level of the concrete is one of the most important also assessments that you need to do before coating the concrete, because high alkalinity can cause huge damage to the coating if it is not first detected and clean it and prepare properly.
And then, typically a lot of things that affect the pH level, depending on the commodity, let's say if it's in a concrete tank or a wastewater situation, is that you have obviously some very corrosive materials that can affect the pH level. And to your point, coating systems, they have a proper level of range when it comes to what type of pH it needs to be done. And earlier you had thrown out the word honeycomb, and what's interesting when we talk about concrete are some of the interesting words that are used, with a honeycomb, for example, but also too what gets a chuckle all the time, or a bug hole. holes. Now, in your experience, a bug hole is not always a defect. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Jim. It's not always considered as a defect.
But a honeycomb would be a definite defect that can cause issues.
Yeah, I would say that honeycombs, compared with bug holes, they will cause some issues because you are losing the aggregate there. So it's very important to correct this defect before coating.
So when you're looking at a concrete surface, be it a floor system or if we're looking at the vertical concrete and containment, you're doing some soundness test. You're using a hammer. You're checking to see if you can hear anything when it would indicate voids behind the top layer of the surface of the concrete. When you determine that there could be certain areas, when a contractor were to do surface prep, or let's say they need to blast it to prep the concrete, are you kind of marking those areas and saying, hey, in this area, there are some voids here, there's some issues here, maybe look at a different type of a blast or a different way to handle that surface prep area?
Oh yes, that definitely will be the best way to do it. But I would like to comment that unfortunately it's not always room. Not because it's not possible, but maybe because the project do not consider, as I mentioned at the beginning, to make some testing before starting to surface prep or code the structure. But as you mentioned, the sound test is very important as well to do it before surface preparation, because you will be able to detect some areas that have concrete on the surface in bad shape. So if you don't assess this properly, you may end doing not proper surface preparation. So it's very important, and thank you for calling for this. It's very important to make the sound test in order to avoid that you can leave some area with some loose or flaky concrete that can detach in service after you apply your coating system. So I will say it's not always the case that you have the opportunity to do it at the very beginning, and unfortunately, sometimes you find it on the progress, and that can cause delays in process to the project.
Yeah, and the other thing too, not that I'm experienced, working in this area, but I do have lots of friends that are either own a contracting company or they're themselves, let's say, blasters, or they work as craftsmen in these projects. Where you are, the contractors going through, the surface prep, there have been, and there can be, let's say that, overworking of the concrete where they create a worse situation when it comes to excessive amounts of repair that have to be done. Typically when it comes to the quality control, quality assurance side of it, you're saying the assessment should be done, and then the determination of certain areas that need to be, looked at or handled a little differently. After that surface prep is done, what type of inspection is typically done before the coating is applied?
Well, after the surface preparation, you will have to assess the surface profile. So you will use the CSPs, the concrete surface profiles. That is different. How you measure when you measure profile on steel is very different in concrete. So you have these coupons that you can use to have a reference if the profile is according to the specification. So you will do that. You will do assessment of the dust over the surface. if there is any oil contamination, for example, or other particles contamination. And, and basically those are very important because that will, according to the specification, that will, the profile will give you the adherence of the coating, and as well as any dust or contamination of oils or other type of contamination will not, you have to make sure there is no barrier or thin layer that can damage your coating. But you also will measure as well the percentage of moisture that is present on the concrete, on the surface or at capillary level. So this is also very important to measure before you proceed to apply the coating system.
And, are you also rechecking the pH level too?
Oh yeah, pH is very important to recheck every step of the process.
Very good, very good. And then obviously the important thing you mentioned too is, testing for moisture, and then also too, any latency that might exist, which would be, basically a weakened layer on the concrete. The concrete might look like it's strong and can withstand anything, but if it's got that latence to it, it's got that little bit of weakness behind it, it can obviously not perform well when a adhesion test is done. And you had mentioned earlier about the CSP, the coupons, and that comes from the International Concrete Repair Institute, the ICRI, and the concrete coatings, the manufacturers give a range related to what the CSP needs to be, what the profile of the surface of the concrete needs to look like and be in order to put their particular coating system on. So, Juan, let's go ahead and move over to, the reasons for coating concrete. Earlier I had mentioned about, harsh environments like wastewater, and then also commodity. If you've got, acids, or you've got, maybe you're in a water treatment, you've got chlorine, where the chlorine could leak out of the tanker truck or for the rail car, and hit the containment, and it needs to be held at that containment and that concrete containment. So, what are some of the other reasons we coat concrete, be it floor systems, be it, the vertical concrete?
Yes, Jim. Basically, I will say that in general terms, the industry tends to, how can I say, the industry tends to consider concrete as a super material. And actually, concrete needs protection against different attacks, as part of what you mentioned, like in water and wastewater, there is a high chemical attack on concrete structures. So I will say that the main purpose of coating concrete is to protect the concrete against these different types of chemicals attacks that may have in different environments. Mm. And the importance of protecting the concrete is that that way you can prevent the concrete to degrade and miss the concrete integrity, and you will end up having problems like, for example, the bar rot corrosion. That is something that will definitely attack the concrete structure integrity. So I consider that the coating systems play a very important role in protecting the concrete against these different attacks that they can be exposed on different environments. And usually some industries don't realize the importance of what we are talking today about, the importance of doing all the tests necessary to assess the concrete condition, not just before coating, but even before preparing the surface. So at the end, all of these will will play an important role in having a structure that will have a good performance over time. So that is one of the main importance regarding coating concrete, is the concrete preservation.
Yeah, when you really look at it, I'm here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You're in Panama, and outside of, let's say, the United States, predominantly the number one building material or use material when it comes to infrastructure is concrete. And a lot of times, you're talking about rebar, and a lot of times at home we might bust up some concrete because it's failing, it's cracking, and everything else like that. And you notice that the rebar sometimes is gone, or it's so brittle, rusted. So the industry's been looking at different ways, from epoxy coated rebar to different types of rebar material to sealers, obviously, to coating systems and linings that are used. When it comes to coating systems, so let's move over to the coating systems. What are some of the typical coating systems that are used on concrete when it comes to the surfacing and linings?
Okay, on the industrial side, the most common coatings types that are used nowadays are the different epoxies, like, let's say, polyamide epoxy, epoxy ester systems, amine cure epoxies. But there are some technologies that are taking over an important place in the market as polyureas. Polyureas, I know that in maybe United States are very very long use, but in other countries outside or regions outside US, polyurea is nowadays taking also a very important recognition on different projects, mainly on coating projects. So I will say that mostly the epoxy families on industrial concrete and polyureas are some of the products, because there is a wide range of other type of products, but those are the most that I have seen in my experience used on different coating projects of concrete.
So as an inspector, master coating inspector, being certified as a level 3 in NACE CIP and SSPC PCI, but also being a level 2 concrete coatings inspector. So you've been inspecting both on steel, concrete, and other type of substrates. How different is steel and concrete?
Concrete? Well, concrete is very different if we compare it with steel, for example. I will mention a little bit about steel. Maybe in my experience, what I have learned about steel is that you can have different markets, let's say marine market, infrastructure, or maybe oil and gas markets, and still you always kind of know, or obviously with training and experience, you always kind of know what to expect. But with concrete, is a different challenge every time in every project. So I will say that concrete is very different from steel, and one of the substrates that require more assessment, more training to do it correctly. And of course that in every project you will find a different challenge every time. And that's why I like a lot when I have a concrete project, because it's a very challenging project, and it's every time challenging your knowledge, your experience, and it's for me it's very exciting project when I'm involved with concrete surface preparation and coating, because it's different ways of inspecting, of different way of selecting the coding systems, different way of assessing the surface. So, so yes, it's very, very different from steel.
And a lot of times, from again the conversations I have with people in the industry, those that have been there, done it, and they know everything about it. A lot of them say that actually, working as a craft worker, working as a contractor, working as an inspector, that concrete is so unpredictable because you have to think of it. You fall on it; it is hard. You walk on it; it does feel like it's solid, but it is kind of like a breathing type of material where moisture can move through it. It does have the ability to breathe and everything like that. So it's not like it's it's less forgiving, let's say, than steel might be. And to your point, I think a lot of people will agree with this, professionals out there, that it still tends to be more very predictable. It follows certain patterns, but again, as an inspector, who if you're not experienced in concrete, you might have some challenges when you're going through and you're doing assessment. You're doing also too, the after the prep and then after the coating, to make sure that the inspection process and all the hole points are proper and everything like that. So one other thing too to kind of cover when it comes to the inspection. What recommendation do you have to owners out there or engineering firms that are looking to hire a third-party inspector in relationship to having someone, let's say they have a certification, not the concrete coatings inspector from SSPC, but let's say they have a NACE or an SSPC, Frazio, or some of the others. What do you recommend an owner look for in an inspector before they hire them when it comes to concrete project work?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Jim. Thank you for asking. I will answer a little bit based on my experience. I think at the very beginning, before we start the chapter of the series, we were talking about that sometimes in some regions, maybe concrete is not considered like like you have to do so much assessments and everything, and kind of just code it and let it go. But I recently I have had some experience working with owners, trying to help these owners to correctly specify, everything from selecting the environment, selecting which chemicals will be attacking the concrete, selecting all the procedures that have to be done in order to adequately assess the surface before any surface preparation, any coating project process. I'm sorry, and it has been a great experience because I think that I have found that when owners consider a third party to help them to go through this process, they find that there are certain processes that maybe they have not considered in the past. And at the end, they realize that having a third-party inspection company or professional to help them to do this, they realize that at the end, they will get a better project. At the end, they will have a better project and they will have a return over their investment regarding all the all the financial part that they have to do, and they will get longer and high performance on their project. So I think that in my experience, it has been great to work with some owners and help them to get better specifications as well, in order to have a project, I will say from the beginning to the end, because sometimes in other experience I have had, and we have just been called just to do the inspection, and I sometimes I tell the owners, you are hiring us, and we appreciate that, but we would like to better serve you and serve you from the very beginning, from the maybe design of the project, so we can give you a better value add, and so you can consider all the process and assessments, and also the how to let know the contractor also which quality control expectations they must have, and that way you will have not, I cannot say that easy project, but a more dynamic project where everybody knows what to expect, and in the process, you can have better control. The contractor will know better what testings they have to do, and I think when I have had this opportunity to help owners from the beginning, from the design of the surface preparation, coating systems, and helping them to select contractors that meet the expectations of the project. I think we have played a better role than just going on the last part of the project, that is the process of execution, where you can do the inspection and try to help, but there are some times that you may encounter some things that cannot be avoided, that and needs to be corrected, not on the process, but on the very beginning on the design project.
Very good. It's very good points you put out there, Juan. For the episode 3, and what I'd want to see if you're in agreement with this, I think, talking about concrete condition assessment I think that's the next good episode. And I think the first 2 topics that we should cover in the 3rd episode for the condition assessment is the alkalinity, checking alkalinity, and then the big important one really is the moisture.
Yeah.
Measuring the moisture. So I think we'll tackle those 2. I think we should be able to do them justice in the time frame that we have. One, I really greatly appreciate the opportunity for this 2nd episode, and getting a lot of great feedback. And I think that this series is going to do very well moving forward. We're tackling some really good topics and everything like that. So I do appreciate the opportunity to work with you, the Master Coating Inspector.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate also the opportunity and have this. I'm really enjoying these conversations, because I think that we together can help some fellows in the industry, to share the information, to share experience, and help our coding community. So I look forward for next episode.
Sounds good. Juan, have a great day, okay?
Have a great day, Jim. Talk to you next week.
So, Joe, for the lay person who's watching this episode, who might only think that corrosion engineering is related to metal corrosion, as an overview, what else does corrosion engineering relate to?